Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, I want to make sure I understand you correctly and fully. Can you support a path to legal status that does not end in citizenship?
No, I support a pathway to citizenship. I believe that's a
so there's no form of legal status that you would support short of full-fledged citizenship.
I just don't believe that's in the nation's best interest.
So the answer is no.
I believe that a pathway to full citizenship is what the Congress ought to enact.
Okay.
So sure.
And I think you earlier referenced that as a compromise, and I'm curious, a compromise between what? Because I don't hear anyone advocating for full-fledged citizenship without background checks, or full-fledged citizenship without back taxes, or full-fledged citizenship without fines. So it's a compromise between what?
Well, I think you would agree with me, Mr. Chairman, that this point that you're at right now, that you're talking about, these, the fact that they would have to pay a fine, that they would go back to the end of the line, that they would have to learn English, that has been worked up as a compromise between senators from different parties and perhaps House members.
But my question to you is, that represents a compromise between what? Because I don't know anyone who's advocating against that. So you represent that as being a compromise. A compromise strikes me as a balance between two competing principles. I don't hear anyone advocating for full-fledged citizenship with no conditions precedent at all. So how is that a compromise?
Well, it's a compromise in my mind because senators from different parties, as Americans want folks to do from different parties, came together and put together a framework. I'm sure they had their divergent views, so if we went to the beginning of the process, then I'm sure there was more divergence in their views. What was put on the table, including the planks that you just stated, represents a compromise position.
What about those who are currently here who do not desire citizenship? Would it be forced upon them, or could they opt out?
Well, I believe that throughout our history, it has been left up to the individual.
So you don't have
I don't
to
think
accept.
anybody's talking about forcing folks to become.
So you do not, because the polls I've seen, there's a large percentage that just want to work legally. They don't desire to be full-fledged citizens, so you would not force that upon them.
What I hear are an enormous number of people who want to be full American citizens. They're patriotic people. They want to serve in the military. They want to be productive for the country. They want to be full-fledged citizens, and I believe that that's in the best interest of the nation. I don't believe that we should. I guess the alternative would be, should we bar folks from becoming citizens?
There is not a legal status short of citizenship that you could accept under any compromise, because the compromise you made reference to is a Senate compromise. There's no compromise short of full-fledged citizenship that you could endorse.
Well, of course, at the end of the day, this is in your hands.
But I'm asking you.
I know, and I believe that the compromise that's been worked out by the senators and that may be worked on by the House members, that represents a great compromise, and that Americans can support that.
What are some of the elements of the background check that you would be most interested in? Because the word background check means different things to different people. I assume it's more than just an NCIC check to see whether or not someone suffered a felony conviction. What do you mean by background check?
Well, and I readily acknowledge, I'm not a technical expert, not in law enforcement, and so I understand y'all are going to have a panel that's going to deal with enforcement.
But you are an attorney. You are an attorney. Very well trained attorney. So
not a very good law school, though.
If you were better than most of the members of judiciary, I suspect your grades were. So what would you include in that background check? Because Mr. Forbes asked you, I thought it was a very good question. If you set the bar at felony convictions, that's a pretty high standard. For those who are under investigation by the Bureau or someone else, and you could maybe meet the level of probable cause but not beyond a reasonable doubt, would you be willing to exclude them from this path?
Well, I think that what's been discussed does go beyond just folks who have been convicted of a felony. I understand that there may be some instances, but that's going to be case specific. I think that kind of thing needs to be adjudicated. It's somewhere between assuming that somebody has committed a crime and recognizing that there are circumstances where someone does present a danger to the United States and should not be in the country. I do think that there's leeway there. Okay. I would grant you that. And these are the kinds of things that I don't disagree with the general point that, this is not easy. This is detailed. It's important work. But I believe at the end of the day that the general principles of the compromise that have been worked out in the Senate are the ones that are the best option for the United States.
My very last question to you, because I'm out of time, is this. This is not our country's first foray into amnesty. And you talked about citizenship and all the benefits that confers on folks. One of the benefits it confers is that you have the protection of the law. So how would you explain to folks in my district or Congressman Labrador's who really do place a high value on respect for the rule of law why we're doing this again if it hasn't worked in the past?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you and I would agree that, as many folks have said, we are a nation of laws. We draw our strength from the fact that we're a nation of laws. At the same time, we're also a nation of immigrants, and we've progressed as a nation because we're pragmatic. And we understand that these 11 million folks who are here, that this has to be addressed. It's in our national security interest. It's in our national economic interest. So I do think that we can find a way to punish these folks for not coming in here legally, but at the same time address the pragmatic issue that's in front of us.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I appreciate your service in a previous life, and I got to confess to you, I was surprised when you used the phrase political bannering in your opening. I was not only surprised, I was disappointed because you seemed to direct that towards the Republicans. It was the Solicitor General of this administration not 2 weeks ago before the Supreme Court who talked about the damage wreaked by the separation of families. Of course, he wasn't talking about Sarah Root's family, and he wasn't talking about Joshua Wilkerson's family, and he wasn't talking about Casey Chadwick's family or Kate Steinley's family. He was talking about the families of people who are not here legally, and that just struck me as a political comment that he made. And of course, it's not us on our side that advocate for sanctuary cities, which is quintessentially a political analysis that we're going to allow state and local officials to decline to follow federal process, but at the same time, we don't trust state and local cops enough to actually enforce immigration laws. That is a political calculus. That is not one done by folks on our side of the aisle. My friend from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, went to great lengths to quote from episodically from a single Republican. I've never heard him quote Secretary Castro, who has come before committees of this Congress and advocated for citizenship for all 12 million aspiring Americans. Like all 12 million can pass a background check. All 12 million, not a single one of them can't pass a background check. So if we're going to talk about political pandering, and if we're going to use your phrase, and you're the one who used it, I think we ought to at least acknowledge there's plenty of political pandering going on your side as well.
Let me make myself very clear. Very clear. I was not referring to one party or the other. I asked for everyone to drop the political banter and fighting and help me get a system that works.
All right.
I want the record to be clear on that.
The record's clear. Let's let the record be clear about one other thing, because I am vexed as to why Mr. Mejia was not detained. Can you tell me, as a former prosecutor, why the killer of Sarah Root was not detained?
An individual from ICE looked at the specific facts and circumstances related to that matter. This individual had no criminal convictions, previous criminal convictions, and made a determination based on his judgment that he did not need to be detained. And can you and I disagree with that?
No. It's more than that you and I disagree with that. That individual was in fact wrong because Mejia has failed to appear for court, has he not? Has he absconded?
It's very easy to look back, sir. Very easy to look back, and yes, he has.
Well, I'm looking back so we can look forward and prevent the next one. And that's about all we can do unless we have a crystal ball, is look back and see what facts we were given him. Mr. Mejia, the only two things you look at in a bond analysis are danger to the community and flight risk. Those are the only two things you look at. So help me understand why someone driving 3 times the legal rate of impairment who is not here legally, did he have any criminal history at all, any arrest at all?
We did not find criminal history. I think I've been advised by Senator Ernst that he had some traffic violations previously, but criminal convictions, our records didn't indicate that he had.
Has he failed to appear subsequently for court appearances?
Subsequent to what?
Subsequent to his killing of Sarah Root.
Oh, no, he did not appear for his
right, so
court hearing.
he's failed to appear. That was my question.
Absolutely.
So the discretion exercised was wrong.
These are tough decisions, sir.
This one actually is not that tough to me,
well,
Director, with all due respect. It's not that tough.
Okay. Federal judges...
Would you have granted a $5,000 bond for that defendant?
I don't think the bond was set at $5,000.
It was $50,000, which means he had to post $5,000.
Yes.
Would you have set that?
I would not. If I were a judge of that state court, and I believe that was a judge of the state court system who made that decision. Another factor that the officer from ICE might have looked at in making his decision. I will tell you, judges make tough decisions every day, and we can point to judges. I was on the receiving end of many of these as a prosecutor, asking for bond, asking for detention, and a federal judge said no, and later that person absconded. Unfortunately, it irks me every time, of course. Unfortunately, it happens a lot.
Well, it does happen, and sometimes with tragic consequences. I'm out of time, so I will close up with this. I believe in a previous life, I'm sure you work with state and local law enforcement in addition to federal law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And it's always struck me as unusual that we trust state and local law enforcement with the enforcement of every category of crime. I'm sure you had them on some task forces, whether it be narcotics, whether it be human trafficking. We trust them in child pornography cases. We trust them in all categories of cases, including traffic enforcement. So why don't we trust them in immigration cases?
Well, we do, actually. We have a 287G program that we enlist the help of local law enforcement in helping us with immigration enforcement. There are a number of jurisdictions, and I've asked our people to expand that program.
You've asked them to expand it because it seems like it's shrinking.
No, sir. It's not shrinking, other than maybe a jurisdiction withdrawing. That I can't control. We beg them to stay, but sometimes they withdraw based on whatever consideration.
So you do trust state and local law enforcement to enforce immigration laws, and you do not buy into the Democrat mantra that somehow racial profiling prevents them from being able to enforce that category of crime, but not any other category of crime?
Well, that's a fully loaded question, which I'd like to break down, because there is racial profiling, sir. I'm not saying that it happens every day, but there is. And so for me to agree with your general proposition would require me to agree with parts of it that I don't agree with.
Well, I'd like to have this conversation more, because there would be racial profiling in narcotics cases. There's racial profiling in traffic stop cases, and that doesn't stop feds and state and locals from partnering. So I'm just trying to understand why immigration cases are different.
And I think I said they're not different. We have a...
You may have said it, but my Democrat colleagues have not. You may have.
Gentleman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Sedana, for being here. Ms. Sedana, last year, it's my understanding that you released 19,723 illegal aliens with criminal records. 19,723. That's the number I've been given. 19,723.
That number is correct by, remember, court order or some discretion.
And these are illegal aliens with criminal records such as kidnapping, sexual assault, DUI, and homicide.
That's correct.
You say that somewhat matter-of-factly as if it's okay.
Well, it's not okay, but that's what the statute tells me, sir. It tells me we need to that we need to abide.
You know, it's just unbelievable to me that we have released 19,723 illegal aliens with criminal records such as kidnapping, sexual assault, DUI, and homicide. It's appalling. No wonder America's in an uproar right now.
It is appalling. I would appreciate you speaking to the Supreme Court of Texas, the United States, with respect to some of it. The immigration courts have another.
So tell me when you can detain them. What's a priority one? Explain to me what a priority one is, very succinctly, very quickly.
Threats generally to national security and
So kidnapping, sexual assault, DUI, and homicide are not priority one?
yes, they are in that priority if they're convicted.
If they're convicted?
Yes.
Now, you got me confused here. We established the fact that you've released 19,723 illegal aliens with criminal records, including those with kidnapping, sexual assault, DUI, and homicide, and you're telling me you shouldn't have released them?
No, I'm telling you, you just asked about priority one. There's another priority they might be included in. And let me just remind you,
There's another priority, so there's more than just priority one?
priorities.
There are two priorities. And the second priority includes kidnapping, sexual assault, DUI, and homicide.
Well, the first could also. The first could because it is persons convicted of crimes. We don't, in the United States, we don't assume somebody is going to be convicted until they've actually been tried. I'm just saying a simple matter of fact. I think that's fairly
So
obvious.
you just go ahead and release them?
And I should remind you that you all determine
So you please answer my question. So you'd go ahead and release them?
if we've been ordered by a court or if we've exercised a discretion in looking at the entire case.
So why
make
are
that
you
decision.
releasing them instead of deporting them?
Because of all the strictures in this statute, sir. I am not going to go outside the law in what I do. I cannot deport somebody without a final order of removal who's had the entire framework, been allowed to follow the entire framework you have provided, including appeals and consideration by the courts with respect to their claims of asylum or torture or whatever it is.
So you're just releasing them right here in America, not deporting them at all. They're staying here, and then we've had numerous examples of where they've gone and committed these crimes again? Don't you find that to be somewhat appalling?
That's horrible. I wish we were. I wish there were no crime committed by anyone.
Well, let me ask you something else. Let me ask you, and since fiscal year 2012, the annual budget has increased more than $680 million. Is that correct? That's the figures I've been given. Since 2012, your budget has increased more than $680 million.
ISIS? Yes.
But at the same time, the number of aliens removed has decreased by 174,000. 174,000. Can you tell me what the reason for that is?
Because we can only remove those people that have final order of removal and the appropriate travel document.
Well, if we cut your budget, would you stop releasing them? Because we're giving you money and you're releasing them.
Sir, you know, you're misrepresenting the facts when you say you
I'm not
release them.
misrepresenting the fact that we have increased your budget over $680 million and you have decreased the number of people that you've deported by 174,000.
Let's make it clear that these releases, only 7,000 plus, have been entirely discretionary. But it's not willy-nilly. It's made on the case-by-case analysis of the record that we have in front of us and on flight risk analysis.
Let me ask you this. DHS leadership took $113 million that Congress appropriated to ICE detention and reprogrammed it for use by Secret Service and FEMA. Why was that? Are you familiar with that?
That is a secretarial level decision.
Oh, a secretarial level decision.
Well, it's the Department of Homeland Security, sir.
Okay. Okay. So that you wouldn't have been involved in that and you wouldn't have known about that?
In the decision?
Or even in the process?
Am I informed about it? I'm informed about the process, but the decision is a secretary.
So we're giving you money and here we are releasing less than 174,000. You know, I'm just appalled by this. This does not make any sense at all what we're doing. No wonder America's upset. But they should be upset.
The gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize, but and I appreciate this, but Ms. Noya, we got to do something. This is ridiculous, ludicrous.
Gentleman's time.
I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now I recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.